Securities. Federal agents seized $19 billion in a Minneapolis warehouse raid. 43 arrested, including a state senator.
At 4:47 a.m. on January 23, 2025, under the pale glow of streetlights cutting through Minneapolis winter fog, a convoy of unmarked black SUVs rolled to a silent stop outside a nondescript warehouse in the Cedar Riverside neighborhood. Tactical officers in body armor stepped onto frozen pavement, their breath visible in the sub-zero air. The building before them looked like 1,000 others across the city: corrugated metal siding, faded signage advertising import-export services, windows dark and unremarkable. But federal agents had been watching this location for 11 months. What they were about to discover would shatter the illusion of legitimacy and expose a criminal empire operating with brazen confidence in America's heartland. The Department of Justice announces the culmination of Operation North Star Breach, a multi-agency investigation involving FBI counterterrorism units, IC Homeland Security Investigations, DEA enforcement teams, and the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. Federal prosecutors revealed that coordinated raids across 7 locations in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and Eden Prairie resulted in the seizure of $19 billion in fraudulent pandemic relief funds, the arrest of 43 individuals, and exposure of a transnational money laundering network with direct ties to cartels operating across 3 continents. Among those arrested, a sitting state senator whose public image as a refugee success story concealed systematic criminal enterprise that federal investigators describe as one of the most sophisticated fraud operations in American history. The initial target seems straightforward. Federal agents executing search warrants expected to find evidence of small-scale wire fraud, potentially a few million, in misappropriated COVID relief funds funneled through shell companies. Intelligence suggested a modest operation run by a handful of individuals exploiting Paycheck Protection Program loopholes. The warehouse served as their suspected coordination hub. As the lead team approached the reinforced steel door at 4:52 a.m., tactical gear rattling in the pre-dawn stillness, none of them anticipated what awaited inside. The breach was clean. Hydraulic rams cracked the lock mechanism, and officers flooded into darkness, flashlight beams cutting through dust particles suspended in stale air. What they found in those first 30 seconds rewrote the entire investigation. The warehouse interior stretched beyond normal dimensions, the building's exterior concealing a space 3 times larger than building permits indicated. Row upon row of server racks hummed with electrical current, their LED indicators blinking in rhythmic patterns. Dozens of computer workstations stood arranged in precise lines, each surrounded by stacks of documents, burner phones, and ledgers filled with handwritten notations in multiple languages. But the real discovery came when agents opened a climate-controlled back room. Inside, vacuum-sealed bundles of cash-lined industrial shelving units from floor to ceiling. $47 million in physical currency, organized by denomination, wrapped in plastic-bearing customs markings from Kenya, Turkey, and Mexico. This wasn't just pandemic fraud. This was industrial-scale money laundering with international reach. Lead investigator statements revealed that forensic accountants working backward from seized bank records uncovered a network of 237 shell corporations registered across 14 states. Each entity existed on paper only, with fabricated employee rosters, fictional business addresses, and carefully manufactured tax histories. Between March 2020 and December 2024, these phantom companies submitted over 18,000 fraudulent applications for federal pandemic relief programs. The Paycheck Protection Program, Economic Injury Disaster Loans, and Minnesota State Emergency Grants hemorrhaged taxpayer money directly into accounts controlled by the network. Automated approval systems, overwhelmed by legitimate claims during crisis conditions, rubber-stamped applications without meaningful verification. The funds didn't stay in American accounts long. Wire transfer records showed money flowing outward within hours of deposit, distributed through a sophisticated layering process designed to obliterate audit trails. Cryptocurrency exchanges in Eastern Europe converted dollars to Bitcoin. Hawalas in East Africa moved funds through informal value transfer systems invisible to traditional banking oversight. Real estate purchases in Dubai and Istanbul created hard assets insulated from American law enforcement reach. And at multiple points in this financial labyrinth, connections emerged to establish cartel money laundering infrastructure previously identified in separate DEA investigations targeting Sinaloa and Jalisco New Generation cartel operations. To neighbors, to constituents, to the media, Minnesota State Senator Fatima Rashid represented the American dream incarnate. Born in Mogadishu, arriving in Minneapolis as a refugee at age 12, rising through public service to become the first Somali-American woman elected to state legislature. Her public advocacy focused on immigrant rights, affordable housing, and economic opportunity for marginalized communities. She chaired committees, gave speeches about overcoming adversity, appeared in campaign advertisements promoting civic engagement. Behind this carefully constructed facade lay systematic criminal enterprise orchestrated with ruthless efficiency. Financial forensics revealed Senator Rashid's direct involvement beginning in early 2020. Her legislative office served as coordination headquarters, with staffers recruited not for policy expertise, but for their willingness to participate in fraud operations. Official legislative computers contained encrypted files detailing shell company structures, disbursement schedules, and profit-sharing arrangements. Phone records showed thousands of calls to known money launderers, cartel intermediaries, and foreign nationals flagged in counterterrorism databases. Bank accounts in her name received deposits totaling $14.3 million between 2020 and 2024, funds she explained away as legitimate consulting fees and speaking honorariums that forensic review proved entirely fabricated. But her role extended beyond simple theft. Senator Rashid leveraged her political position to influence state oversight mechanisms, weakening fraud detection protocols within Minnesota's pandemic relief disbursement agencies. She sponsored legislation that reduced reporting requirements for emergency loan recipients, creating regulatory blind spots her network exploited aggressively. She cultivated relationships with officials at federal lending institutions, using her public credibility to deflect scrutiny when irregularities emerged. To investigators, the evidence painted a portrait of calculated corruption, someone who understood both the machinery of government and the vulnerabilities of crisis response systems, then weaponized that knowledge for personal enrichment while betraying the refugee community she claimed to represent. If what you're hearing shocks you, hit that like button right now. This story needs to reach every American who deserves to know how their tax dollars disappeared while families struggled through lockdowns and businesses collapsed. Type exposed in the comments if you believe elected officials who betray public trust deserve maximum consequences. The network's infrastructure extended far beyond Minneapolis. Evidence seized during raids revealed coordination cells operating in Columbus, Ohio, San Diego, California, and Portland, Maine, cities with significant East African diaspora populations that the organization deliberately targeted for recruitment. The operation employed over 200 individuals, many immigrants themselves, promised legitimate employment processing pandemic relief applications for struggling small businesses. These workers, operating from residential addresses and rented office spaces, had no idea the applications they submitted were entirely fraudulent, the businesses fictional, the bank accounts controlled by criminal enterprise. They believed they were helping their communities access emergency funds. In reality, they were unwitting participants in systematic theft. The cartel connections emerged through financial tracking and intercepted communications. Money flowing through the network's cryptocurrency channels intersected with accounts previously identified in DEA investigations targeting Mexican cartel money laundering operations. Physical cash seized from a Minneapolis warehouse bore forensic markers, residue traces, and packaging methods, consistent with currency processed through cartel-controlled currency exchanges along the southern border. Informant testimony revealed that cartel financial operators had approached the fraud network's leadership in late 2021, offering money laundering services in exchange for percentage-based fees. The arrangement proved mutually beneficial. The fraud network gained access to sophisticated laundering infrastructure, while cartels obtained a new revenue stream cleaning proceeds from American soil without cross-border movement risks. Investigators discovered that approximately $4.7 billion, nearly 25% of the total fraud proceeds, flowed through cartel-controlled channels. These funds merged with drug trafficking profits, becoming indistinguishable from narcotics revenue as they moved through the same shell corporations, real estate ventures, and international wire networks. The contamination of pandemic relief funds with cartel money represented what federal prosecutors described as a dangerous convergence, demonstrating how organized crime adapts rapidly to exploit systemic vulnerabilities regardless of their origin. At 6:13 a.m., on that same January morning, as teams processed evidence at the Cedar Riverside warehouse, synchronized raids erupted across 6 additional locations. In St. Paul's Frogtown neighborhood, officers breached a residential property serving as a document forgery center, seizing industrial printers, blank identity documents, and stamps bearing official seals from multiple federal agencies. In Eden Prairie, a suburban office park address concealed a cryptocurrency mining operation and digital wallet management hub where technicians move funds through blockchain networks designed for anonymity. At Senator Rashid's legislative office in the state capitol building, agents arrived with search warrants, escorting stunned staffers from their desks while securing computers and filing cabinets containing years of incriminating correspondence. Senator Rashid herself was arrested at her Minneapolis residence at 6:08 a.m. Tactical officers executing the warrant found her awake, already dressed, sitting in her living room as if expecting their arrival. She said nothing during processing, invoking her right to legal counsel immediately. Agents searching her home discovered encrypted laptops, thumb drives containing financial records, and 3 passports issued under different names by foreign governments. In a safe hidden behind a bedroom mirror, investigators found $2.1 million in cash bundled with rubber bands, alongside handwritten ledgers documenting payments to various individuals identified only by coded nicknames. The scale of seizures that morning exceeded initial projections. $47 million in physical currency from the warehouse, $8.3 million from residential locations, 23 vehicles including luxury SUVs, Mercedes sedans, and a Bentley Continental registered to shell corporations. 4 residential properties valued collectively at $6.8 million. And most significantly, frozen bank accounts and cryptocurrency wallets containing assets totaling $3.2 billion, traceable directly to fraudulent pandemic relief deposits. Federal prosecutors emphasized that this represented only a fraction of the $19 billion in total fraud, with the majority already laundered beyond immediate recovery through international channels and hard asset conversions. Share this video immediately. Every American taxpayer funded this theft while watching their own businesses fail and savings evaporate. Comment accountability if you believe the full extent of this corruption needs congressional investigation. The human cost emerged in victim impact statements and investigative journalism following the arrests. Legitimate small business owners in Minneapolis described desperately applying for pandemic relief loans, facing rejection after rejection, while their applications languished in bureaucratic limbo. They had no idea that thousands of fraudulent applications submitted by Senator Rashid's network were flooding the system, consuming resources and overwhelming approval processes. Restaurants closed permanently. Family-owned shops that survived generations declared bankruptcy. Employees lost health insurance and homes while fraudsters siphoned billions into offshore accounts and cryptocurrency wallets. The betrayal cut deepest within the Somali American community that Senator Rashid claimed to represent. Community leaders expressed devastation that someone who rose from refugee camps to political office, someone held up as proof that immigrants contribute meaningfully to American society, had exploited her position to enrich herself while perpetuating harmful stereotypes about immigrant communities and fraud. Young Somali Americans described feeling personally implicated by her crimes, facing renewed suspicion and discrimination because someone who looked like them, who shared their background, had committed systematic theft on an unprecedented scale. Federal charges filed against Senator Rashid and 42 co-conspirators included wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy to defraud the United States, aggravated identity theft, and making false statements to federal lending institutions. Prosecutors announced they would seek maximum sentences, arguing that the defendants' exploitation of pandemic emergency programs during a period of national crisis represented aggravating factors warranting enhanced penalties. Senator Rashid alone faced 173 individual counts, carrying combined maximum sentences exceeding 300 years in federal prison. Additional charges targeting cartel connections remained under seal as investigations continued into the international dimensions of the money laundering network. DEA officials confirmed ongoing operations targeting Mexican cartel financial operators who facilitated movement of fraud proceeds, with arrests expected in coming months spanning multiple jurisdictions. The Justice Department emphasized that Operation North Star Breach represented one component of a larger strategy to disrupt cartel financial infrastructure by targeting diverse revenue streams beyond traditional drug trafficking enforcement. The investigation revealed systemic failures at multiple levels of government oversight. Congressional hearings examined how pandemic relief programs approved applications without meaningful fraud prevention mechanisms, prioritizing speed over verification in ways that created predictable vulnerabilities. Minnesota state auditors face questions about why irregularities in relief fund disbursements went undetected for years despite red flags, including impossible employee counts and businesses operating from residential addresses. Federal lending institutions acknowledged that automated approval algorithms lack sophistication to identify coordinated fraud patterns, a deficiency that criminals exploited ruthlessly. Type reform in the comments if you believe emergency relief systems need complete overhaul before the next crisis creates identical opportunities for theft. Hit subscribe so you never miss updates as this prosecution moves forward and more details emerge about how deep this corruption actually runs. $19 billion, not million, billion, stolen from American taxpayers during the worst public health crisis in a century. Stolen by a network operating with impunity from a warehouse in Minneapolis, coordinated by a state senator whose refugee background gave her credibility she weaponized for personal enrichment. Stolen through systems designed to help struggling families and businesses survive unprecedented economic devastation, systems exploited by criminals who understood that chaos creates opportunity, and overwhelmed bureaucracy rarely looks closely at what seems legitimate on the surface. This case forces uncomfortable questions about trust and verification, about how society balances emergency response speed against fraud prevention rigor, about whether the systems built to distribute aid during crises are fundamentally vulnerable to organized criminal exploitation. It reveals that criminal networks adapt faster than government oversight evolves, that cartels seeking to launder money don't discriminate between drug proceeds and pandemic relief funds, that individuals entrusted with public office sometimes harbor motivations invisible to voters who believe in their stated values. And it reminds us that the greatest thefts often occur not through violent robbery, but through bureaucratic manipulation, not in darkness, but hidden within legitimate-seeming paperwork, not by obvious criminals, but by those who cultivate reputations as community leaders and public servants. The warehouse in Cedar Riverside looked like 1,000 others. Senator Rashid looked like success incarnate. Behind both facades operated machinery of systematic theft that federal agents are still fully untangling. The fraud network servers contain records spanning 5 years. The investigation continues. More arrests remain likely. And somewhere tonight, in warehouses and offices that look entirely unremarkable, other criminal enterprises are studying what worked, what failed, and how to exploit the next crisis more effectively. Like this video if you believe transparency matters. Comment justice for every taxpayer who played by the rules while criminals stole billions. Share this story because mainstream media coverage will fade, but the precedent matters for every future emergency we face together. And ask yourself, if this happened in Minneapolis under our noses for 5 years, what else is happening in plain sight that we simply haven't discovered yet?